heading to the office right now. I'm going to put all this information on the whiteboard. We just finished our latest build. We rented it in 2 days. I'm going to illustrate 3 different loan structures with the rent. We got full list price, going through all those numbers and which scenario I picked. Brandon here from B2R Investing and Financial Talk, nailing financial freedom one build at a time. Before I get into the numbers, I want to go over why I do the build to rent model and what I've been able to produce as I built every property, and just show you how good this investment was. So this one appraised at $270,000. Now, what I do in my past career, I used to critique appraisals. So I do look at the appraisal, making sure it's accurate, making sure they're using valid comps to see if it's really worth what they say it is. And there have been times where I didn't think they used the right comps and they overinflated the value. So I always put in what I think is an accurate value. But looking at this appraisal, I did look at the comps. I think they were the exact comps they should have been taking. And that actual appraisal came in at $207,000. The cost to build this property ended up being $208,000. So this was my actual cost. This is the actual value. Then with a $62,000 forced equity. And what I like about my build to rent model, I do believe wholeheartedly in focusing on cash flow, but I also focus on more than one thing of growing wealth without my money from the very beginning, building both wealth and cash flow at the same time. So I created $62,000 in equity that I didn't have to pay for, which represented 23% of the value that was created. And so as I'm about to explain the loan structures, the maximum I would have had to put in at 75% loan to value would have been, the loan would have been $202,000. But what I chose to put in was $18,000 down to start with a loan that was at $190,000, I believe, and starting at a loan to value at 70%. But I still only had to put in $18,000 on this build plus closing costs. And you'll see the numbers and see why I chose to do the build to rent model and why I chose the loan structure I'll explain, and see what magnified returns are when you focus on both cash flow and growing your wealth at the same time. These are the numbers. So we put it on the market. You might have saw part 5 with the walkthrough. We put the property on the market for 2 days. By the second day, we had the application ready to rent. And I'm going to go through those scenarios. She loved it so much, she didn't want anybody else to get it, and paid for the entire year's lease up front. So let's get started. So I've got 2 different scenarios here. So our cash down, similar cash down. I have all of this on a spreadsheet with lots of formulas so that I can just plug in a few numbers, and basically it tells me the answer, what's the best structure to it. So I thought I'd go through it on the whiteboard. As I'm left-handed, of course, I write this a lot ahead of time and then just put a few details. So our cash down is $33,500. So I've got 2 structures, one paying no points, no buying down the rate, and one paying 4 points and buying down the rate. So what we'll start with is the rent. It's $2,050. And what I want to share with that is that it did not meet the 1% rule. Not everyone meets the 1% rule, and it may still be a good investment. And I'm saying 1% of my build cost. It was just slightly under my build cost. 1% would have been $2,080, and it ended up being at $2,050. So $2,050. But what I'm putting in here is principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. I save reserves for vacancy and CapEx. But what I do the first year is, because these are brand new and I get a builder's warranty, I don't start at 15%. What my method is I start at 7%, and every other year I add a percent till I get to 15%, which typically takes almost 10 years. But that's between 8 and 10 years is when repairs begin. But the first year I have a builder's warranty. So if anything breaks, he's repairing it. So I start at 7%. What I also figure out is the internal rate of return. That is the cash flow and the principal pay down. The other thing I figure out is the tax benefit. So I add back in depreciation over and above the cash flow and the principal pay down and see if there's any balance in between to save me money on taxes. Then I look at forced equity, because I do build to rent. I'm able to build these properties for less than what their starting value is. And then natural appreciation. I stay very conservative. I look at the subdivision. This is a large subdivision with over 500 homes, and I've looked at the historical average, and I'm being conservative, and I'm putting it as a natural appreciation of just 2%. So we're going to go through the numbers, and then I'm going to put it in percentage so that you can look at it, and then we can discuss and see what was the best structure. Then I'm going to do, on the very last video, a video if I were to just do a loan at 75% loan to value. So here we are at no points. So the rate was 7.25%. Rents on an annualized basis is $24,600. The principal, interest, taxes, and insurance came out to $19,092. Reserves for vacancy, CapEx, and any type of maintenance, we're starting out at 7%, is $1,722. So what I'm looking at is cash flow on this scenario with this loan. It's actually at $183,000. So I took the difference in the points and I put that down on the loan balance instead of using it to buy down the rate. So cash flow ended up being $3,777 for $315 a month. What that equates to is still 11.1% of the $33,500. The principal pay down is $1,742 on that balance of $183,000, but the interest rate is 1% higher, so that principal pay down equals 5.2%. Tax benefit on this, so then our internal rate of return is 16.3%. Cash flow at 11.1%, which my minimum is actually higher than 10% on any project that I'm looking at. That's what I hold myself to, is trying to be 14% or higher on my cash on cash return. Cash flow of 11.1% in this scenario, principal pay down of 5.2%, and then tax benefit. Because of this, the tax benefit ends up being, sorry, I have all the notes, ends up being, if I can write this here, 17.4%, adding back in the depreciation. Because I'm a real estate professional designation, I get to take all that out of all my income. So it ends up being, after the tax benefit, of 17.4%. But then I created this forced equity. I know how to create value, net worth off of every purchase and investment I make, and I've made from the build at 208,000, it's worth and appraised at 270. I created $62,000 of equity for a return on my 33,500 of 182.4%. Then I've got natural appreciation that comes out to, so I'm doing these in the same color I wrote them, 12.2%. And so for a year one return on my 33,500, 211%. Not bad. But I'm still holding my money accountable. I'm looking at it and I want to see if I buy down the rate, is my return better? Using that money instead of putting it down on the loan, putting it on points, does it make it a better return? So let's look at those numbers. So we're looking here. So 4 points, the loan ended up being 6.25%, $193,000 loan. So principal and interest, taxes, and insurance ended up being $18,158, almost $1,000 difference. Of course, the reserves are still the same, but the cash flow, it changes. $4,720. That ends up being $393 a month, putting the same $33,500 down. My cash on cash return ends up being 14.1%. Big difference from 11.1 to 14.1. Principal paydown, because the interest rate is lower, principal paydown is more at $2,211 versus a 7.25% interest of $1,742. So my return on my money ends up being 6.6% for an internal rate of return of 20.7%. So right here, even off of cash flow being higher at 14.1, principal paydown higher at 6.6, my internal rate of return is higher from 16.3 to 20.7. Tax benefit. Is there a change in the tax benefit? Yes, there is. Because my cash flow and my principal paydown are significantly higher, it's actually end up being about break even on what depreciation would be on this property. So it ended up being zero change. So we look at forced equity, it ends up being 182.4%. Natural appreciation, that stays the same at 4,160. So that comes out to 12.2%. For a total return of 215, get that right, 215% return on year one money. So I look at this and I say it is better to pay down the points. I've locked in that 6.25% for 30 years. I'm holding my money accountable. I make a better return on my money, even at the bottom line, year one, of about 4%. But my cash on cash return, I'm in the, and y'all have seen other videos, the wealthy money category is 14% or higher, but that's even just on my cash on cash return, 14.1%. Now let's go to another final structure, the paying down and just putting 75% loan to value, how much money I would have to put down. This ends up, the 4 points, just so you know, the 4 points paying the loan down to starting out at 6.25, this ends up being the number one scenario, but I thought it'd be good to show you the difference if you were to put very minimal down. I like to start at a loan to value of 70% and higher, and I like starting at a higher per month cash flow, starting out at $393 a month. Now at the very end, I want to share the final scenario. This was a scenario I didn't pick, and I'm going to explain at the end why I didn't pick it. It actually comes out to a higher return, but I thought it was not the best return for me and how I want to do things going forward. So on this one, I looked at a loan of just putting the minimum down and for the closing costs for the loan. So I did not do a loan buying down points, but did the loan at a 75% loan to value. So that came out to a loan of, when it's appraised at 270 to 202,500 at a 7.25% interest rate. So of course the rents are the same, but the principal, interest, taxes, and insurance is now $20,697 when the other scenarios were several $1,000s less. The reserves stay the same. What changes? Because the payment's higher, our cash flow is $2,181 for a cash flow per month for this property at $182. Principal paydown is $1,957. Forced equity, of course, stays the same, and natural appreciation stays the same. But because we've put less down, because of the law of smaller numbers, the proportions, the percentages get higher. So our cash on cash return, if we've only put $13,500 in it, our cash on cash return is 16.2%, principal paydown of 14.5% for an internal rate of return of 30.7%. Because the forced equity is at $62,000, our actual return on our cash is 459%. Same thing with natural appreciation, $4,160. Our return is 30.8% for a total year one return of 526%. The reason I did not choose this, even though it's a higher return, is because I'm starting out at $182 a month. I am choosing to be a little more conservative. I'm 53, and I want to get to a higher cash flow earlier as I'm getting closer to retirement, as I'm planning to retire here in the next several years. I want to start out at a higher starting point. So I picked the one with the points starting out at $393 a month versus the $182. And because I started at a loan to value at 75%, my goal is in the coming several years to have where all of my portfolio is at 60% or lower here in the next, ideally as an average in the next 5 years. So starting at 75%, it's going to take me that much longer. But if I'm starting at 70%, for one thing, the cash flow starts at a higher starting point, which is what I feel comfortable with. Even though this, I only have to put $13,500, I'm making this choice because of the stage of life I'm in and what I feel most comfortable with. This is that scenario that I did not pick. Till next time.